So, hey, what's up, everybody? So this is Jonathan Stidd with DealMaker, who's one of our companies we work with that we have great synergy with. They've raised $2 billion through their platform, and they've, have one of the most advanced technologies in crowdfunding. 750 plus companies have provided securities, right, through their platform. And Jonathan's an entrepreneur, right? Many years of growing and helping different founders build their companies, build their businesses, right? When you look at Jonathan here to share today, right? He's truly an entrepreneur at heart, in his spirit, right? And so, I want to talk about some things because Rebecca, your partner, was letting me kind of know, you are a digital marketing machine. Tell people a little bit, about you or a little bit more about Reach.
Appreciate the introduction. You all are a great partner and client of ours that, we love raising capital for. It's a great use case for the industry for, how we're able to use our tech to help you all raise capital. But yeah, from my background, I always wanted to be at the intersection of helping companies grow, right? Which obviously getting out of college, I didn't really know what that meant aside from the feeling of it. So I found myself in management consulting, and you're at these banks around a bunch of people in ill-fitting suits, and it's just this big company that you think you're in there to help them grow, and then you aren't, right? So kind of exited from that and started my own business and found myself in digital marketing and was like, oh, this is how you help companies grow, right? So as we started off as an agency in e-commerce, helping companies, scale up their Shopify stores, that was one way to help them grow. But, coincidentally, it aligned with my original mission when, somebody reached out and said, hey, can you help us raise capital online? And we said, sure, here's how we would do that, right? So instead of selling a $60 hoodie, how do you help package up a $600 investment opportunity for somebody and leverage digital for that? So I'm very lucky. A somewhat circuitous path led me back to helping founders build businesses, right? Because the big banks I was working at definitely didn't care.
So you care. That's the first part.
Well, yeah, exactly. And that goes a long way, right? Caring and accountability. It's yeah, we actually, want to do good work, which is part of how we've gotten this far, right? Having good process around what we do and a high level for the output that we want for our clients.
Let's dig into what founders are, because I think founders can be awesome, but they can also be assholes, right? So what makes a good founder?
Somebody being okay with learning from, touching the stove and it's hot, right? You go to Chase Bank and you experience that, you're like, well, of course I didn't know that, right? So but it can be huge business setbacks, right? I had stuff like that where, all of a sudden I realized they weren't deducting our healthcare payment from it. And all of a sudden we were just our team didn't have healthcare, right? Because they didn't deduct it. And I was like, well, what if something happens to somebody this weekend, right? So you got to be able to roll with those blows and be comfortable on that. But I would also say, around the accountability aspect, right? There you are the face in the forefront. So dealing with the pros and cons of being, highly accountable for your work and the team is something that, you see people deal with in different degrees, but I would say, that's the crux of being a founder. But, in the work that we've done, had the opportunity to meet a lot of great folks doing cool things, right? Whether it's, a company with a psilocybin product or, something in AR, VR, video gaming, right? So we've met some folks across the board, but yeah, that's one of the things accountability and what that means, right? There's, it's hard running a company and being a founder, and yeah, it's not as glamorous as what people think.
Did you just slide ayahuasca and a DMT experience in with video games all at the same time?
Yeah, I threw that right in there.
Covertly just slid that in there like that, right? Influencers is something we've looked at, right, deeper and deeper, and having them be brand ambassadors and stuff, with our company with capital raising and stuff, and we'll have real data on kind of how that's worked or not worked, right? And so, what is your opinion on influencers within the capital markets and, sharing investments, not sharing investments? Because a lot of people, the big, crypto that, got destroyed, and they had Tom Brady and they had, some other, big names as a part of their brand. I mean, what's your opinion of that whole scope?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the whole FTX fiasco is sort of wild because you look back on it and you see the characteristics of that person and you're like, wow, that seems like a crazy, impossible story. And turns out it was. It was, it was
like a 10-person harem, 10-person Like,
Yeah.
yeah, right. It was kind of mind blowing that some of the
Yeah.
follow up conversation I've heard on that.
As it relates to like general influencers and, you know, in the capital market space, right? There's obviously the alignment factor, right? It's like, you know, I guess Tom Brady wasn't truly aligned with crypto. He wasn't, you know, going to get in there and like really kick the tires on something. But, you know, for us and what we do in our industry, I think certainly valuable. There are some pros and cons, right? Cons being like some of their reach is tied to algorithms that the platforms own in a way, right? Unless they like have a very one-to-one relationship, whether it's, you know, email or like a Discord, right? Or something like that. So, you know, being somewhat um, pessimistic about the continued access that they may have, right? So, you know, signing up for a lifelong deal may be hard, right? But, you know, something that's fair in terms of the share of it, right? Just for example, you know, I think one of the things that we'll see with YouTube more and more is they're going to cater their algorithm to more algorithmic suggestions, right? Which is going to have people lose reach on their YouTube videos, right? So for somebody with influence in the YouTube space, right, that could dissipate. And it's the same thing Meta did with Instagram, where, you know, before we used to sponsor people's posts, right? But now that post isn't going to get, you know, a ton of reach, right? So just being aligned with those partners and thinking about, you know, how to mitigate risk in terms of like their ability to reach, right? And not just making it like a one-off partnership for a post, but somebody that you can align yourself with as a business over time, who is an influencer that, you know, has some of your business values or even own personal values, right? Like those are the best people to align with and make it long term. So that's the kind of stuff that we're looking at when we partner with folks, is like, what can we do long term and make sure everybody's goals are aligned, and it's not like some one-off post. Because also, you know, the pricing dynamics of that are a little not opaque necessarily, but, you know, everybody has a different idea of what their, you know, cost per impression should be. And for some people, you know, they think it should be very high. So when, you know, the different people get to set the price, sometimes there's different expectations on that.
There's one thing you said in there that like I caught that I want our investors to pay attention to, right? The difference between a registered security and an unregistered security, right? There's really no investments they should ever be making that are with an unregistered security, right? Unless they're buying their own piece of real estate, right? Besides that, they should always be a registered security, right? And even when you look at like private funds or private equity, right? And if they don't have full auditing and full transparency, right, with their assets and their investments, like I think investors got to be aware. That's like, you look at FTX and Madoff being the largest two scams we've seen, right, in our lifetimes that I know of. I'm sure there's been plenty of others. But those are things where those things were built to fail right from the beginning. And so it's one of those things that if they were a public security and they were forced into regulation, it would have made a huge difference. What do you think about crypto's regulation right now? It's a hot topic, right? You seem pretty familiar with crypto, right? Them regulating that industry. What are your thoughts on it?
I feel like Coinbase has gotten a bit of a raw deal where they're, you know, getting dragged in front of the SEC right now, despite not being ever given, you know, clear guidance on where crypto falls, as, you know, if it's unregistered or registered, and how you got to deal with that, right? So, you know, I think the, you know, flaccid leadership is sort of all over the place, but particularly, you know, at the SEC, it's like, you know, somebody's got to stand up and make a choice, right? And recognize that this is probably a technological and even financial shift that is happening. So set up the proper infrastructure and, you know, declare your side on it, right? You know, they're bringing Coinbase in to, you know, point a finger at them, and Coinbase is saying, well, I wish you all would tell us what you want us to do with this. Like, it's on you to decide what you think crypto is, and then we can act accordingly. So I think they've gotten a bit of a raw deal on it. You know, to me, it does sound like it should be a registered security, because you have ownership in a coin, and while it's, you know, kind of like an asset class, like, you know, like a commodity, it's not, because you have upside as this wave rides, right? It's not like buying like, you know, orange juice futures, right? Like it's different. You know, you have ownership in a project, in a coin, right? So to me, that feels more like a company. yeah, that's sort of where the thoughts run out. It goes back to what I think is kind of flaccid leadership around, somebody's gotta take charge and help
Yeah.
this industry mature if they want it to. There's, a real big argument why the US government in particular may not want that industry to flourish.
At the end of the day, right, crypto exists. There's a whole lot of money in it. I think it'll continue to exist, right? And I don't think it's going anywhere. I think it being regulated makes it more legitimate, right? In the long run, I think that if they required wallets to be insured the way banks are insured, right? It would change the game dramatically if they regulated it the way they regulate banks, because essentially it's a form of banking, in my opinion, right? And so
Yeah.
if they regulated it that way, I think you would not only see crypto prices really go up, but I think you'd find more people get involved with crypto because they'd feel more comfortable with the overall. It's tough being in the SEC though too, right? It's not like crypto existed 20 years ago, right? It's not like there's a track record and a history to fully understand it inside and out. And then if you're a lawyer or someone there that has a completely different background or experience, right? And now you're put into financial matters and you got to make decisions on this, and then you have to bring in, it's just, can government keep up with the speed of technology is always the challenge they're going to run into in any government situation, right? I'm also never going to be the person that pokes at the SEC ever in my life because they can make my life more challenging. But the thing I wonder about crypto is like what's the future look like for it? Is it a currency that countries start to adopt? They don't start to adopt. I mean, I do think there's a point in time where the cash dollar disappears, and I'm sure organized crime doesn't love that, but I'm sure they're probably way ahead of all of us at this point, and they probably do digital currency better than all of the rest of us could even imagine. So, yeah.
What is that, section 233, where it's like, the Facebook isn't responsible for the content that's on there, right? Which like continues to be a sticking point. Like they can't be responsible for all the
But
the
they still
content.
censor content, so they're not responsible.
Well,
But
yeah,
they censor.
exactly, right? Where it's like, we built these information highways, and to your point, like cutting them some slack. It's, it's true, right? It's a tall task. And when the internet set out, like, did you ever imagine, a Facebook, right? And the power that would have of, what gets censored and what doesn't, right? It's like the Hunter Biden laptop thing, right? It's like, well, they had a hand in that, but it's like a crazy decision for, like a company like Meta to have to make. So, I think you're rightfully pointing out, like, to keep up with the speed of technological change is, deserves a little patience and respect for, because they're on the front lines of, trying to figure this out at the speed of TikTok.
I mean, you guys are, famous for helping people raise capital from online advertising, online marketing, right? And to be able to get the entrepreneur, the business owner they need for capital to be able to grow their business, right? Because growth is hard and growth takes money. Where do you feel like AI is going to take digital marketing? Where's AI going to take online marketing? Because it's going to change the game. Like what we see in the next 24 months will be some of the largest changes, I think, in digital marketing that we've seen in the last 20 years. I think we'll see more change in it in the next 12 months than maybe we've seen in the last 10 years. Are you in agreement with that? You think differently?
Where we'll see it most effective for us is just around content creation, right? Where it's hard and expensive to create image assets and video assets. And, how do you showcase these founders in the best way that we want to continue to help raise capital for, right? Which we're really lucky to do. That's core to our mission. That's, what I set out to do when I didn't even know what I was doing, right? Back in management consulting. It's like, so we're lucky to do that, and using some of these tools to continue to power that, I think is big. For us, it'll be more in the way of content creation, for whether that's a video asset and editing that, right? Which can take a ton of time, but something like AI really speeds up that process. And something that we've really pushed the creative teams to leverage. So, address the elephant in the room and say, hey, these tools are going to be around. You're going to have to use them, whether you're here working with us or somebody else, because this is your profession. So like, let's lean into these tools. We want to use them to help lever you up. So, I would say advice for anybody in the space, like thinking about that, address it with your teams and let them know it's like a tool that everybody's excited about and them using to, create more, right? And
I think trusted source becomes more important than ever, because anybody will be able to create content, right? That'll be the thing that, like, content creation was pivotal to thought leadership. It was pivotal to a certain type of industry and you wanted to be a leader in your industry. But if they can't, now it's going to be whether like you can trust the thought leadership or not. Because like I've played with ChatGPT, right, and a few others, and like it can put out some really extensive information. It may not be accurate, it might not be perfect, right, but it can put out a crazy amount of info.
Well, certainly. And the problem is it's like, people trust it and it looks legit, right? Because it could, I think something happened recently. It was like the first, I think for a radio host or something like that, Chat GPT's response was like they have some felony charge or something crazy like that. So it's kind of like the first charge that's being brought against this. But problem is, people trust this. So yeah, I think that's going to be a real problem when, the cost of content essentially goes to zero. There's going to be a wave of it, and, people need to have good digital hygiene to try to fight that. But the content's really good. I was going on a bachelor party to the Bourbon Trail with some friends, and some other friends were doing something else that weekend. So I said, "Hey, ChatGPT, write a poem to my friends from the Bourbon Trail." And it was an incredible poem. It would have taken me hours to write. And I sent that to him, and it was hilarious. But it's like the speed of the content is going to be a real problem, and that trusted source. It's like, I think it's going to lead to some sticky situations, particularly in like geopolitical nature. Hopefully less so for advertising. But one of those, again, back to the speed of technology changing, saddle up. It's going to be interesting to watch.
It'll be really, really fascinating. When I look at, some of the AI that's out there, like we just finished, our book Money Shackles, and I'm like, is this one of the last written books, right, in the world?
Yeah.
Because like how many books will actually be written by people, right? And as they go forward, I rewrote it, I think 3 times in 6 months, it felt like. So, the question comes back to, right, is what's going to be real and not real. But I think that's the fantasy people have always been dealing with. Like what's a real company, what's not a real company, what's a company that's going to succeed, not going to succeed. I look at an investor today like investing with us, and they'll question every aspect of their investment, and whether truth, legitimacy, right, and all of these different things. But I look at us today from like when I first offered out my first private investor to invest with me, like 2007, right? The first time, a single investor, friends, family, invested with me into a real estate deal. I'm like, what were they doing, right? What were they possibly thinking? Because like we were just beginning, right? And like I had no proof, no track record, no history, no reality, right? And one of the things I realized over the years is how much a large stack of paper makes someone feel like you're credible and legitimate, and it doesn't. It really doesn't. And that's where like the FTX stuff, the Madoff stuff, that's where that stuff happens. And I look at us today with audited third-party accounting, all of the different stuff that we have as a company, third-party evaluations of property, like all the different stuff, and transparency of assets and different and hundreds of millions of assets. Like, how's that even? But it's just as difficult for the investor today to invest with me as it would have been back then, because they're still asking the same questions. And so that trusted source becomes huge. Do you think it gets rid of content creators or thought leadership? A lot of thought leadership in the world. I mean, thought leadership is already, there's not Martin Luther Kings and Gandhis anymore, right? So it's like where does that go?
Well, yeah, certainly. I hope it doesn't get rid of content creators and, the thoughtful thought leadership, right? It's like, I've listened to you talk about the chapters in your book, and like that is thoughtful thought leadership, right? Like that comes from business experience, right? And your upbringing, like, really valuable tidbits and pieces of advice to share with people. Like that stuff, I hope finds a place. I just think people will have to be more savvy in how they seek it out and soak it in, unfortunately, which is too bad, right? Because when you can turn up the dial, it turns everybody into a thought leader. So any Yahoo with a voice now can just crank out content. I think people will get discerning in how they absorb it, and I hope they have the digital savvy to find the right people to seek it out from. But yeah, it's a real unknown as we go forward. Like we said, content cost goes to zero. What happens when that happens? It's I hope there's a spot and a source for trusted thought leadership, right? Because we're not far away from some sort of video spoof of somebody who doesn't even exist, right? They're just like
Building a
you
whole
look.
business brand that
Yeah,
doesn't even
exactly.
exist. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be kind of interesting. I mean, from a fascination standpoint, I'd be curious as much as.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's hard not to think about. It's like, yeah, but you could unfortunately see it working too. You know?
One of the reasons I first started like bringing investors and investing with people and doing education though is because in the real estate education industry, there was just so many, false prophets, so many, bad gurus who didn't do real estate. And so that was one of my great frustrations is I would go and take a class, I would attend a course, and then I would go and implement, and the reality between implementation and what they taught weren't A, B, and C didn't line up. And that was, I think, one of my great frustrations. And one of the reasons we started our first fund was because I didn't want investors having low success rates, right? And I wanted to see, like what if every investor who ever invested with you, what if, right? They all succeeded. What if every single one of them made money, right? Those what ifs was kind of what motivated me or drove me to become a thought leader. I think the challenging part is people every day are trying to decipher that code, but they don't have, experience, knowledge, background to decipher between good, bad, ugly, right? When it comes to investments and those kind of things. And really what DealMaker's done is it's helped create the alternative to Wall Street, right? The Wall Street is trillions and trillions of dollars, and now crowdfunding is billions, right? And so, the question is where do you think the industry goes in the next decade? How do you think crowdfunding stands up against Wall Street, 10 years from now, 5 years from now?
Yeah. I think it'll happen on two fronts, right? Where, more people are becoming familiar with the ability to invest in these private offerings, right? Which are big. And then simultaneously, hopefully, right, more folks like yourself, founders, companies, look into this as a means of raising capital, right? A company that we've worked with over all of their raises, Monogram Orthopedics, recently went public on the NASDAQ. And I think as we get out of the incubation stage of the early part of the industry, some of these companies just have a continued track record of success, right? And it's like, back to you and your company, it's like, it's you build up that track record and that trust over time. And what we're going to see is some of these, eggs hatch and grow like a Monogram Orthopedics, which I think will normalize this and be an exciting avenue for people where they, see it as the first option instead of the last option, right? And it's like Monogram Orthopedics, crazy to me, those guys can get funding out of the gate. Co-founder Doug, he, is an actual orthopedic surgeon. Ben ran R&D at a company, doing robotics, right? People wouldn't give them a sniff. So they said, okay, we'll raise it on our own. So, they do 4 raises and go public. And the coolest thing I think about it is like, this, it's people who have access to IPOs. It's, people with wealth management accounts at Morgan Stanley. They're already accredited investors. They're the ones getting in before. So people are missing a lot of this big upside. And that, you couple that with back when, VC funding was just awash, right? All of these companies can just stay private. And as they stay private, they're growing, they're getting out of their growth phase. So by the time they go public, right, they're no longer that growth stage company that gives the retail investor, this continued ride on it. Like, picture like
Well, IPOs have really gotten fewer, right? And less successful, right? And more recent years, but still, like for a company like mine, like I have to make that decision, right? Do I want to do a huge cash grab, right, and do an IPO? Do I not want to do it, right? Does that change the DNA of the culture of what we are, right? That's a question I have to ask myself. Would I rather do 100 Reg A's over the next 10 years, right, and raise 7.5 billion over the next 10 years and through 100 Reg A's, or maybe we can get the laws to pass and I can raise 15 billion, right, over the next 10 years, right? I mean, those are big BHGs, right? But like, or do I IPO, right? But what I hate about the REITs and the funds that I've seen be IPOs, what I hate about them, right, is they're babysitters, right? They're not trying to get the maximum profit for their investors. They're not trying to absolutely turn every single deal. They're not trying to get under market, off market, value add, like all the things we do to make sure our investors make money. But when you're that big, maybe, is that even possible, right? I like to believe it is for investors. But like you said, when companies get to that point, do they care anymore? And that's why, like, when you see a founder no longer involved in a company, for me, that's a tough investment at that point for me.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, huge red flag on that. You want back to the accountability that we talked about before, that person, they give a shit, right? And that's important.
Yeah. So, because at the end of the day, like if the founder's not involved, the original mission, intention, purpose of the business can't exist in the same manner. And I don't know how many staff members, team members would have viewed, shifted, adjusted our vision and mission, and unintentionally, right, with the best of intentions, but would have shifted it from back to what its true DNA of what we are, right, and being investor-centric versus money-centric, greed-centric, right? When like my capital is involved in this just as much as every other investor's capital is involved in this, so like it makes a difference in how I look, and like I get irritated when rents aren't collected, right? Or I get irritated when the simplest thing is like Rebecca said it on one of our recent podcasts with her. She said aggressive priorities, right? Be aggressive about your priorities, and when your money's invested, you're aggressive about your priorities. When it's not your money, like there's something that gets lost in that part of it for sure.
Well, certainly, and that's just back to the accountability. That it's like you clearly take that seriously, and it's you are building up this track record of RADD and you, and it's like that's why those people reinvest, right, and stay along for the ride. So I wish there were. Yeah, it's when you see the founders dip, there's no longer a long-term view and a mission to the company. So certainly a red flag. But yeah, it's somewhat a tough nature of the stock market in and of itself, and quarterly reporting, right? People are working for the quarter as opposed to a year-long, 5-year-long view to accomplish stuff for their investor base rather than shortcutting something to look good at the quarter. Yeah.
Cool, brother. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up, right, for the
Right.
podcast and stuff. But I think we can rip and steal a lot of freaking kick-ass nuggets out of there. So.